Does doing the right thing come at the cost of business performance? Can ethics and profit coexist? Welcome to the Human Conversation podcast. Join host Kaumadi Gowda for candid conversations with industry luminaries as we navigate the maze of decision-making in today's global workplace. Each episode offers a window into the minds of leaders achieving remarkable outcomes while balancing diverse priorities and stakeholders. Tune in for thought-provoking insights and actionable strategies on leading with ethics every day. Because in the pursuit of excellence, integrity matters.
Our guest today is Marion Mulder. Marion brings her experience in both technology-driven innovation and social system change to create desired futures for purpose-driven organizations. As a co-thinker, Marion helps organizations become future-proof by co-creating inclusive and sustainable futures. Every organization faces three major waves: digitalization, or AI, sustainability, and social impact. Using methodologies such as strategic foresight, scenario planning, systems thinking, systems innovation, design thinking, futures thinking, and agile or SAFE, we collaborate on transformation towards a more purpose-driven, desired future. With roots in digital technology since 1998 and driven by a passion for strategy and innovation, Marion enjoys working together on solutions the world needs. As a futurist, she delves into future possibilities, crafting scenarios for both potential and desired outcomes. Dedicated to being a future maker, Marion transforms ideas into actions, focusing on setting agendas and catalyzing change to create a more equitable and just world. Welcome, dear Marion. I am so very excited to have you in our studio today.
Great to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Marion, you've had such an interesting career. Technology, conscious innovation, the future of work, advocacy, mentoring, speaking worldwide, to name just a few. Is there a red thread that ties all of it together for you? I wanted to know what was the driving force behind all that you do.
Yeah, that's a good question. You kind of only know that when you sort of look back, right? So I was kind of looking at one point, what is the red thread through my career? And for the longest part, it was digitalization. So I started in tech, if I can call it that, somewhere like just like 90. It started for me in 1997 when I went to this event where the speaker talked about this new upcoming thing called the internet, and they called it the information highway. And he had a floppy disk with bookmarks on it that also was a new thing, and he showed a QuickTime 3R like photo, and I thought, wow, this is going to change the world. And I remembered being in that whole room, and the majority of the people went like, but I already have a flyer for my business. Why would I need a website? But I went like, yeah, this guy's onto something. So, and that's kind of been the curiosity that sort of has been with me all the time. So I have a book here, can't see where it's now, but it's about the future makers or futurism. And it turns out I'm an explorer or a map maker. And an explorer means someone who's just going into the unknown path. And a map maker is someone who then, while you're walking, might as well draw the map for the people who follow me. And I think that's kind of what I've done. And for the longest time, it's been digital. So it started with websites or an intranet and just turning a 300-page manual, printed manual into a website version with cross-links and things like that, to then got into intranets and my environments. And then when apps were a big thing, I got into apps and I had my own startup. I'm not going to say startup, but I'm not supposed to do the quotes, but and it was very educational. It was, I wouldn't call myself a startup founder, but sometimes I will do because, hey, I had a startup. And we build an app, and I learned a lot about the whole process, about when you think it's all about technology, it's not at all about technology. It's about everything else. Technology is just a means to an end. And we probably would, we should have that same conversation when talking about AI right now. It's not a means and it's a goal in itself. It's a means to an end, and we need to think about what that means is for us. And then about 8 years ago, I was working at a company and working on my portal for the internal customer service kind of thing. They started with this idea. There was an internal pitch competition, and someone I knew from like way back from my e-business times when that was a thing. He was also there again, and he said, "Hey, we're doing this startup pitch. We're pitching a virtual assistant, and we need another woman on stage. Would you like join us?" I'm like, "Oh, great! By the way, what is a virtual assistant?" And this was now people know it, but back then nobody knew it. So that sort of put me on that trajectory of AI or conversational AI or chatbots. And for like 6 years, I had to explain to people what on earth that was. And then ChatGPT came around and everyone like, oh, that's what AI is. And the same time when I started doing those chatbots and got involved in this whole thing, I had the same feeling as I had when this guy talked about the internet. And I'm like, oh, he's onto something. This is going to change the world again. This is like bigger than apps. Something's going to happen. This is going to be a different interface again. We're going to interact with technology in a whole new way. Like when we started with internet, we had no idea what you could do with computers. Phones were kind of like an evolution of it, but now it's much more immersive. Sometimes you don't even know anymore, and we start talking to ChatGPTs and all these things like it's our best friend. It's a very different one, whether you type or talk or all sorts of things. And at the same time, about 8 years ago, when I worked on the first chatbots, I'm like, why are all these women? Are they all women? Right. So, and I'm all for women in tech. Don't get me wrong. But I'm like, is this the way forward? Why is this? So got exploring into that, and that's actually put me on in the field of ethics. I've started following people through the World Summit AI. We're on stage. Who've been doing AI ethics for 20 years. I'm like, oh, I thought this was a new field, right? So they really were knowledgeable, and we're talking about responsible AI before the rest of us would know what AI was. And that really was helpful to see that. And that actually also made me see the bias in the technology, but also that it's a reflection of society, especially when you talk about AI now. And of course, society has its flaws. But when you start putting that in technology, it's basically starting to get carved in stone, and it's going to be harder to get it out there. So that's where I became an advocate of conscious innovation. So once you start doing innovation, let's be conscious about what's happening and how this is treating people. So it's great opportunities, but also you have to think about who's benefiting, but also who's being harmed with this by accident. Usually we don't do this on purpose unless you're one of those specific type of hackers who wants ransomware. But the majority of us use technology because we think we're improving the world. And then for some of us, then it becomes a worse place to be in. And that's something we need to be mindful of. And that's where the whole trajectory come in. So, and partially that, I think my actual view for ethics, besides the fact that I'm a woman, the world's built for men. I've got this great book standing here called Invisible Women. It's a really good one to explain, clearly the world's been built for men by men, and we also live in this world. So that's the woman part, but also I'm queer or I'm lesbian or however the right terminology of that is. I was one of the founders of an organization called Workplace Pride back in 2006. So this was about LGBTQI plus and work. So wouldn't it be great if we could just be ourselves at work? And that's what everybody else wants, right? But for us, it's not a given. There's countries in the world where you have to hide yourself, where if you tell about who you love, that could actually be grounds for firing you. So that's like you have to hide parts of yourself. So that was like getting my attention from an ethical point of view about is this really helping everyone, and who are we leaving behind, and who are the vulnerable ones. And I've been in this lucky position where I had a family that was was fine with it. I haven't had, so I don't have all of these adversity in my own life. So I feel a bit of a noblesse oblige kind of privilege. Like I need to, I need to use my privilege for good. I need to be standing out there on because I have a great life. I can be out. I need to, in Dutch we say voorleven. So I just have to be this example of how it can be without, look at me kind of thing, but more like just showing people we exist, and there's nothing weird about us. So these worlds have come together, and that's how. And this is just question one. So I think maybe if you know how much time we have, ask one more question. And I think we've got our whole entire podcast filled. But and this is how I kind of, when I started getting into AI, and I give a lot of talks about it. Mine are much more about inclusive, responsible AI conversation. So what is AI is, of course, always a part of it, but also, it's already possible. And where does it go wrong, or does it go right all the time? And the answer, of course, is no. And use my own lived experience as an example to show people, okay, these are minor inconveniences. But just if you start extrapolating that, and there's other people for who this is not a minor inconvenience, it's actually life threatening. So let's be mindful of that. And that's kind of how I get into conscious innovation, because you asked me, can you look at your red thread of your life? That's kind of being in emerging technology, or in emergence of something. And for 20, 30 years, it's been in technology. And I think only recently I started thinking, I'm not sure if I want to continue working in tech. Because with AI, I'm like, okay, I want to be part of the technology that's making lives worse? So I had to really navigate that sort of situation. And I'm also starting to look more into, and I still want to work in tech, by the way, because I realized I have a role to play there still. But I'm also getting more towards, the social aspect is already part of my life, but also the green or sustainability side of things. So thinking about regenerative. So a lot of what we're doing is exploitive, right? Just we're exploiting the earth, but we're also exploiting people, just to use their data, for example, and not giving anything back for it. So I'm bringing it all together and still looking at and in awe about technology, about what's possible next, and going from there. So that was one question, and then a very long answer. Next time, if you want a short answer, just say keep it short, and I will do.
No, it's just so beautiful. And I think immediately it should be obvious to the audience just how powerful a speaker you are, because there's so much to unpack in the beautiful, sweeping canvas you made for us as you took us along on the journey of how you are where you are today. And there's so much to unpack there, Marion. You talked about having such curiosity and pioneering energy to you is in so many years. I think that in of itself is such a fascinating conversation. You're right. This is content for so many podcasts, because I think one of the things is always that risk appetite and that willingness to go where you don't know anything is quite difficult for a lot of professionals to manage, because it's scary to not know anything. Most of us work really, really hard to earn competencies and learn skills so we know something. We're authorities on something. And to let that
Right.
go and deep dive into areas that nobody knows anything about. And you're pretty much a rowboat in an ocean trying to figure it out. That
Well, that's actually
energy.
interesting that you're
Yeah,
saying that, because for me, it doesn't feel that way at all.
yeah,
It doesn't feel courageous. It's just I'm curious, and once I've explored something, I've been somewhere for a while, then I get bored. So when everybody's talking about chatbots like 2 years ago, I'm like, yeah, I've been in that for 6 years now. Yeah, I'm moving on. So I know I'm like at the earlier waves, but I'm always following people who are further ahead of me,
beautiful. Yeah,
and I find that really so. It's not completely stepping in a blank space. There's always amazing. There's always someone who's done it before,
yeah.
and with the current, with internet and with YouTube, you just type in a certain term, and like there's a whole wealth of people having so much knowledge about it. So it's always amazing. So for me, it's just I love to explore new stuff, and I'm doing this from a safe space. So it's not like I have my job and then I start exploring, and then gradually it just goes there. So yeah, that's interesting that you're saying. And the other thing is what I do when you say about learning skills is getting a little bit older, right? So I've worked for like 20, 30 years now, and I have a coach, and I think that was last year. She said to me, "You need to get from knowledge to wisdom," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, what does that mean?" Right. So I'm like, I felt that she was right. So I'm like, she's onto something. I'm like, oh, darn. Because I had I was like, what does that mean? But I've come to the conclusion, like, knowledge is much more about thinking you have to have the solutions. And I've been very, very big on creating solutions. That was like my skill set is like, coming up with solutions. And wisdom is much more about asking questions. So not having answers, but asking questions. And it's just a different modus. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm gradually getting into, but it was a bit uncomfortable because if you think if you always have the solutions and people come for solutions to you, then when you start asking questions and rather than coming up with solutions, that's for me was different because the outcome is the same. You make people think, but if you ask the right questions, they can figure it out for themselves. I don't have to give a solution anymore. So it's but yeah, it was fun. Sorry, that sort of bubbled up when you said that.
Absolutely. And I experience you as very wise. And I understand
Oh.
what you're saying. Perhaps said it right at the beginning that we can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Mm,
But for me, sitting where I am watching you speak, every time I've heard you speak, this is what I felt is in addition to that curiosity, while it is uncertain and unclear and you're navigating something brand new, that instinct that you also want to make maps for those that follow
mm,
you, that sense that you're never really alone while you're being an explorer, there's always a greater humanity you can connect
yeah,
with. That sense of your privilege is not invisible to you, Marion, and it is invisible to so many of us. Knowing that you have that privilege in real time, in while you're present, and wanting
hmm,
to do something with that to help people. The fact that you're so drawn to conscious innovation in AI and ethics so far back, and
yeah,
the fact that you stood in your truth in 2006 when it really was not daily conversation.
not
It
at
would have
all.
been, yes, you see, all of these little anecdotes you've shared so casually. I experience that as just tremendously wise and so very human and beautiful. And as
Yeah.
you said, probably it's only visible when you look backwards and connect the dots that, oh my goodness, look at all these marvelous things that I have being part of my journey. I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's interesting also because um, I'm just doing it, right? So for me, these weren't like conscious big steps or something of like, oh, let's go change the world. It was more like um, the interesting thing is usually somehow I get asked or invited, and usually by people, but sometimes also by reading something. And oh, that's something that's interesting, and so I get sort of invited. So when we started Workplace Pride, and that started with the Pink Network at ING where I worked at the time. I wasn't the starter; it was David. But David knew me, and he said, we need more women. Do you want to represent the women? I'm like, okay, great, because I don't know where they are either. And it was more like, I just say yes. And it is more like that. Just I hear myself say yes. I'm like, oh, okay, I just said yes. And then so there isn't it's not a mind thing. I was going to say mindful, but it's not in my mind that I do this. This just comes from within, and it can only happen when you feel calm about it. So that's so they're never like big sort of decisions. It's just sort of something that's like I said about the chatbots. This guy I knew he said, hey, we need another woman on stage because it's just men here. Do you want to do that? I'm like, yeah, cool. Because I believe in more women on stage, but also I thought, oh yeah, I like doing those things. I like being on stage. So just said yes and then figured out, okay, so what does it exactly
I love it.
entail? And sometimes when I get myself into things like, oh, why did I say yes to this? But then, you get through it and they're the best stories. So, and the best memories.
It's a fabulous lesson as well. Say yes first and you can figure it out. Even if you're scared, say yes first.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And like, I think it was 5 years ago. I just got out of a relationship, and then I told myself I'm going to have a yes year, or more like a, oh, why the hell not year, right? So it's not like I'm saying yes to anything you're asking me. I'm not like, what was the guy again that had that film, like, you said
That's
yes to
right.
everything. That
Yeah.
wasn't the goal. It was more like when someone says something, are you coming with, you want to join to this particular event? The default answer would be yes. Or the, yeah, why not? So, which is not very, yeah, why not? And so it was more about not giving it too much thought, but if it just felt like it, let's do it. And I've said no to things as well, of course, but and that was amazing to do that for a bit.
I love that. I'm a ethics researcher. I'm fascinated by the idea of what can we do to create environments and organizations where every professional feels they have the agency and the power to make ethical
Mm,
decisions. I do believe it's possible for all of us. One of
yeah.
the things that I particularly admire about all of your talks, whenever I've seen you on stage, is you're very vocal about the importance of AI and ethics and
Hmm.
conscious innovation and being inclusive in how we innovate. And I
Yeah.
noticed particularly, Marion, that you've always had this sense. It's, I think, particularly challenging when we don't know, when it's uncertain, ambiguous, rapidly evolving. Your career has evolved so much, and some of the technologies and innovations you were involved the very early stages. You were very
Hmm.
much an explorer, but your sense of what is the, and it's a loaded term, but right thing to do,
Hmm.
the conscious thing to do, the importance of being inclusive, the importance of being ethical has stayed
Yeah.
with you. Can you share with us a little bit what those terms, ethics and integrity, mean to you, and how you use that sense of what ethics means to you in some of these new sunrise domains that you've been involved
Yeah. It's a. I'm just thinking what the right answer to this would be, because somehow I'm like, that's just so it's one of those things. It's so logical for me that I'm like, how do I put this in a framework kind of way? But I guess I think it's about, does it come from the heart, right? Just let your heart speak. And I'm getting more and more. So consciousness, of course, also means the way in. And if you're not very conscious, then your ego takes over. But you're also not very prone to what your effects are on other people. So it is about this gut feeling where, like, if something tells you it's off, it probably is. And then figuring out, can I figure out what is off, by maybe just um, drilling that down in my mind. So that's one way of doing it. Just it is the my two ethical questions I usually use in my presentation. Maybe that's a good start. Is just because we can, should we? And that's kind of, I think, is a gut feeling going like, oh, okay, maybe this is not the best idea. And you can also just sort of wonder then, like, so what could possibly go wrong? And usually that's usually examples from other similar things. You go like, yeah, we don't want to be like them. And the other thing is, how is this helping humankind or the planet or the world in a sustainable way? And if I can't answer these questions, then that's a really big red flag. So just because we can, should we, is also what someone I know called that question zero, and she's like a big in ethics as well. So I'm like, yeah, that's a really good one. So once you have that idea of, yeah, this sounds like a good idea to start with, then it's also seeing if you can use frameworks and methods to make sure you do the checklists. So from an AI point of view, there's two frameworks I work with. One is called the Impact Assessment Fundamental Rights, Impact Assessments, Fundamental Rights and Algorithms, and there's different variations of it available in Europe. This one's based from the Netherlands. And from an AI point of view, it starts with why. So why are we building this? And then the what. So what are we building? And what kind of data is necessary for that? And I forgot what question 3 is. And then the last question is about human rights, or fundamental rights. And that there's a list in that document of fundamental rights. I kid you not, I think it's 10 pages. You go like, okay, how many fundamental rights are there that you could possibly accidentally infringe on? And once you start seeing that, that's a really good, helpful sort of tool to work with. And people who work in technology often have to fill out all of these forms to do this, and then it becomes this form filling thing. And it's like, oh, I need to do another four-letter acronym assessment. But the point of this one is, for me, is not so much filling out the form, but having that conversation with multiple people, and preferably a diverse group of people. So having someone who represents the user, and that could also be like someone internally, but also the affected. So if you're building something that is going to assess people, you want the people who are being assessed to be in the room and tell you why that might not feel great for them. That's and then having all sorts of different people. So from the technology, from the business, from the ethics field. So just have this whole diverse group of people from both skill sets, but also from a biological point of view, like men, women, people in between, different nationalities, different backgrounds, different lived experiences. Just get them all in the room. And that's helpful. And the other one is called the guidance ethics. And also, and that's also really a conversation about who are involved or could be affected, and it could also be possible, of course, because being affected by making a lot of money is still being affected by it. So who's affected? What are the values that are underlying this? And then from there, just saying, okay, what are the that's for this handelingsperspective. So what is the options that we can then have to make that give that a good perspective from a technology point of view? So what do we need to do in the technology? Do we need to maybe put some guardrails in? What do we need to do in the environment? So, and what do we do with people? So people could be, for example, we educate them, and the environment could be that you place some signage here and there. It's that kind of question, and it's having that conversation with a diverse group of people that is really helpful from an ethical and I think an integrity point of view. If you don't do that, I've seen like when I presentations, and I think the big one is from Little Britain. I don't know if you know the comedy series where this person types behind the computer and computer says no. It's that kind of what happens a lot. It's like, yeah, that can't be right. So who built this? And it's when you talk about chatbots, it's or technology. There's you see the errors that come through. I recall this example from Amazon who used AI for their recruitment process. And very strangely, that just selected men. You go, really? Did not. And I'm like, how come we've only found that out once it was in production, and someone went like, oh, this is interesting. The slate of people that we get through is very non-diverse.
Yeah.
What happened here? You go, like, who did the testing in this process? Who was involved here? And this is not, it's from a diversity point of view and from a societal point of view, that's one thing, but it's also from a business point of view. It's like, this is not good business. You're harming yourself here. Like, nobody's going to win from this one. So it's just also having business sense. Like, who wants to put a bad product out into the market? That's like, okay, I don't get that. So that's where for me conscious innovation comes in. Is there's a lot of people with enthusiasm, and they're just not as aware. And then we bring these kind of awarenesses in without it being like all of this finger pointing, just making it fun. And you go, and once you're in there, you go like, yeah, we're not going to go back. This is way better. So it's having that conversation. I think that's sort of where would it go with ethics and integrity from that one. But long story short, just because you can should be. That's really your internal guide, your intuition going like, if your stomach turns when you see something, yeah, listen to it. And how is humanity, how's the world getting a better place because of this?
No, as always, a very rich and comprehensive answer there. I love the very robust blueprints that you've shared. I think that's fantastic checkpoints for people. And the most powerful formulas or checklists for us are often the ones that are most intuitive and simple. You're asking questions, as you said, that should be question zero. In addition, also I noticed the importance that you have highlighted around stakeholder centricity, understanding not just the innovation and the importance of efficacy of that innovation, that it should work well, but also
Yeah.
for whom does it need to work, and ensuring
Yeah.
that we test for all of their perspectives,
Yeah.
and also
Yeah. So,
recognizing the nuance
yeah.
that it's the context and the environment sometimes, and sometimes
Hmm.
it's the people. So also
Yeah.
understanding, assessing, and ensuring the guardrails, whether it needs to be for the environment or the human beings involved therein. That
Yeah.
so it's a very beautiful way. And another thing I notice, I know this is also something that is very relevant to sustainability conversations, is the nuance you're pointing out between checklists and checking the box for the sake of it, which is a lot of
Yeah.
what's happening in sustainability now. Organizations and DEI as well, as a matter of fact, right, Marion? Because
Mm.
woke washing, greenwashing is directly as a result of organizations and human beings feeling pressured that they need to check those boxes. But the nuance
Well,
you're
it's a good
pointing out
start,
is,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a
the
good
nuance
start,
you're
but yeah,
pointing out is, yeah,
there's a
it's
long way to
beyond
go
that.
from there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. It's beyond
Yeah.
that. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also I have a lot of design books behind me. If you're watching this rather than listening to it, this is also about design thinking. What problem are we solving, and who are we solving it for? And part of it is the value proposition canvas. Is like what pains and gains are there, and what actually are the tasks of people, and whether they're what are they likes and what are the dislikes about how that is done. That's where we want to create a product that is actually solving a problem, and you don't want to create a product that creates additional problems. At least most people who use design thinking um, for it, or follow these processes, and it's quite it's gaining popularity. You do that because you want to solve a world problem, not just because you want to get rich. Of course, there's people who want that, but and there's no harm, or it's not bad if you're solving a problem that you make money off it. By all means, that's a good thing. That's a win-win-win situation. But if that's the only goal, then probably the product is also not really a good product, because it's not really solving a really good problem. So it really comes down to that as well. So if people don't like the ethics or integrity sort of spiel on things and going, oh man, then I just pull out the design thinking things, and then it then becomes much more logical, and then just gradually weave it in there. And again, if you start creating, that's when my app time comes in. We thought we knew the problem, we knew what the problem was, and we just build an app without really involving the target audience. So once we finally launched the product, nobody bought. You're like, well, hey, an app for connecting people together. So you were like, okay, getting ready for the flood of people to come in. It's like, why is nobody signing up here? And he goes, okay, was this really a problem that needed solving? And was this the best way to solve it, right? So I've learned it by having this own app, and it was a very educational lesson. I mean, I've read it all in the books, then went through the process myself, and went through all the things you shouldn't do. We went like, yep, done that, done that, done that. And I think it was good that I went through that once, because now I'm aware of it and go like, yeah, let's test this with end users before we actually build something. Let's do some interviews, just see if whatever idea I have resonates with them, because you're doing it for them, not for yourself. But then it comes back again to from the heart, which means involving others and doing it for that versus your own ego and need for validation yourself.
It's a powerful distinction you draw between theoretical and abstract knowledge versus actually doing it, and the necessity
Mm.
for pivoting and evolving, which seems to
Yeah.
be a huge motive in all of your career, as a matter of fact. In fact, at the last panel I heard you speak on, I think it was you shared the example of also how sometimes you can take it too far in tinkering with an algorithm. So I think it was you shared the example of um, the desire to be better at representing all the diversity of humanity
Oh yeah.
sometimes meant that when you searched for an image, historical image, Would you like to share that? I love that on you.
Yeah, it works usually better when you actually show the image, but it's about bias correction. So um, when you work with ChatGPT or something or the similar ones, of course, there's like all sorts of products that do exactly the same. Um, then you use your language to prompt and to sort of ask to bring an image back that is what hopefully is something that you had in your mind. Um, and when I do that, and especially when you use text and to type things, it's not as obvious. But when you start using images and create an image and you say, create a group of people at work, and you go like, oh, okay, why do I see 10 men with a tie? That was not exactly the image I had in mind. So you have to start thinking, okay, I'll have to put in, a bit more diversity. When the default started to be, very undiverse in the beginning, then you saw, oh, I have a bad internet connection. Um,
Um,
Sorry, that's always when you talk about technology, then you get a bad internet connection and you're thrown out. I think that was on my end.
no problem. No
um,
problem.
I
So
think you
let's
asked me,
just,
you
yeah.
asked
So
me,
I'll
yeah,
prompt
so,
you again. I'll
okay.
prompt you again. Okay, I'll say, okay. So I love that distinction you draw between theoretical and abstract knowledge and actually testing it in real life with real people and needing to
Mm,
pivot and evolve. One of my favorite examples that I've heard you share in a panel in the past that I've seen you in, you talk about searching for an image and the effort of the algorithm to be representative and how it can all go wrong.
oh,
Marion, would you
yeah.
like to share that example?
Yeah, sure. This was about bias correction. So the language models like ChatGPT have bias in it because they're a reflection on society. When you just use text, that's not as visible. But when you start, creating images with these things, it becomes more prominent. So you start prompting things for getting people in a group, and then you go like, okay, why are there like, for example, a group of men at work, sorry, you're asking for I want a setting of work, and then you're like, why are there like 5 men in ties? That's not exactly what I was looking for. And by the way, why do they all have beards? That's at the moment also you can't get them out. Anyways, um, so people like us, we start to like me, we start to prompt and make it better, and then actually, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Apparently, the default is not what I'm looking for. But you see the product owners like, ChatGPT also catching up. So then they put some bias corrections in. Now, and then some a friend of mine asked about, can you put some women in different cultural contexts? And then you see this group of 4 Dutch girls and it's the Netherlands because there's cheese and toes around them. And this was before there was a more recent update of the technology that's getting better. But then you see this, and then they're like all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds, but also you're like, yeah, but they look like Americans to me. And then they had all sorts of different ones, and they just went too far with too diverse, as in, okay, we've got one of every flavor. It's a bit like, we put the Spice Girls on there. We have one of everyone, right? So we check the box. But then again, they were all very skinny. But it is sort of the Spice Girls kind of thing, right? It's like, okay, I just asked for a group of friends, and you're just giving me the Spice Girls, but then in different sort of clothings, and all super skinny. And this is not representative. But that's what we mean by bias correction. It's like, okay, we're trying to fix it now. Then we dialed up too much. So how do we get this right? And that's a really interesting point, because my right is probably different than your right, because we have different lived experiences. So our expectations are different than what we're supposed to see. But it comes back again to whoever developed this product, and when they were testing, I always wondered, like, how diverse was the group of testers there that they didn't see this the first time round, or they thought it was acceptable to ship the product when it was clearly not, showing a really good reflection of society, just one sort of very specific view on society. So yeah, that was sort of, but it's much more fun if I present it and you have these images behind you, then it's much more visual than just doing it like this on the podcast. But yeah, that was
One of the
fun.
things
Yeah.
you mentioned was also about competing priorities. Just because you can, should you?
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you, can you humanize that for us a little bit? Was there a time when you yourself perhaps faced the temptation that they were competing priorities, perhaps as a entrepreneur founder yourself, or you were an advocate, expert, subject matter expert helping a client, and on one hand there was profitability and first mover advantage, on the other this is question zero that you raise, should you do
Mm.
it simply because you can? Did you ever face that example, and could you share it?
Um, Not so much in, well, let me give you an example that sort of, it's not exactly this, but comes close. When I was working for this large organization and we started the Pink Network, I was also on the board of the Pink Network, and then we got a new head of diversity, and I spoke to her, and she went like, "Oh, when do you start?" So I started working for her, and then being from the networks, we did this from the passion, right? So we saw something that we could, the company was doing a lot of things already pretty good, but we also saw there was room for improvement, and not everybody felt fully at home. That there was room for growth there. But from the networks, when this comes from the heart, there is no hierarchy. It's just passion drives you. It's voluntary. And actually, there's a word for it called amateur, right? But amateur means actually from love, amor. So you're doing this from within, from love. There is no remuneration about it, other than that you just feel that this needs to happen. But then I started working in diversity, and I had to deal with the traditional structures of putting structure in, and I had to sort of start managing the networks. And I'm like, yeah, no, that was really difficult for me, because I had to do a top-down structure, hierarchy on something that just doesn't compete with that. It's like I now have to ask those volunteers who do this on besides their regular work. I have to ask them to put KPIs in place just because you want to measure some progress. Mm. And this is where I had to really figure out how to navigate that, and when to sort of and also just figure out, why is this giving me such a discomfort in my gut? So how can I then start talking to my management and saying, I knew, this isn't going to work. It's gonna kill their spark. Basically, you're just putting sand on fire, and that's not going to work. So, and they're not doing this for the same motivation as like getting a paycheck. So how do I navigate that? And that's where that was a tricky one to get through. And I think it was partially. It also made me realize I shouldn't work in diversity anymore, because I do things from passion. But I need to do this in a different place where these things aren't competing in that way. So that's how I got, when you bring diversity in conversations about tech, I am not a diversity professional where my whole goal is diversity, and that's become it's again like AI is not a goal, it's a means to a goal. The same was like diversity is not a goal, it's a means to a goal. And it works for me better if I work in a different environment where I can use it as a means to the goal I want to reach, to make it better rather than. So I think that's where the biggest part is, and otherwise, it also comes down again to the diversity side of things, or more from the LGBTIQ plus world and my advocacy in there. And again, it's just about being me, right? It's like when you have to talk about diversity, or when you start talking about into organizations about LGBTIQ plus and work, we had to talk about business cases, and it's like, okay, I am valid only when I'm a business case, when you can make money of me. Is that really that didn't sit right with me. And it took me a while to realize that, there was always this discomfort when we had to sort of talk about the business case for diversity. And like, I was actually actively advocating for it internally because we needed to get more diversity and then we need to get the money for it to get it all done. So I had to figure out for myself a way to navigate that. I said, I could step out of it, but then I can't reach anything. I also realized that we were talking the language of the group we wanted to convince. So to get them on board, you need to speak their language first. And once they're on board, you can start having these other conversations. So I think that's a couple of the examples. But it made me aware. It made me conscious of that my stomach would turn somehow. I would have a physical reaction to these situations. And I think that has triggered learning to listen to your body more in situations and become hence more conscious to also not really get into these situations where you just don't want to be in. Because at the end, it's going to drain you. And then you have to figure out, do I have enough fire because I want to fight this? But then you have another goal and then you accept it. Or do I step out and just go for a life that is more aligned with who I am? So I navigate that from time to time. I mean, when I'm an advocate, when I'm doing advocacy or activism, I'm a bit more accepting that I end up in situations that that might not be really pleasant because you're starting to talk to people who have a different opinion than you. But then I know I'm doing this for the group who can't, and then it's okay for me to say, okay, come on, just dump it on me. Then I can handle this in this particular situations. Not in all, by the way. And there's also places I wouldn't go. But so I think it's kind of that. I don't know if it's really vague and trying to figure out how to explain this, but it's for me. I think having learned to listen to my body is a really good navigation in dealing with integrity issues.
Thank you so much. That's actually I experience that as a very powerful core truth. It's difficult. And in sharing
Yeah.
what you did just now, you made it acceptable that we are constantly exploring the deeper
Yeah.
truth ourselves and we continue to evolve. And sometimes you reach a conclusion and you have an aha moment about yourself.
Yeah.
It's revelatory, and you
Yeah.
understand I am good to fight this from this angle, and it makes more sense for me to continue this way. And
Yeah.
this previous way of being and approaching this problem does not serve me at this moment, and I can
Yeah.
let that way of being go and try something new. I think that evolution is so important, and also to allow ourselves to discover new facets of who we are and who we want to be. That
Yeah.
makes it a less brittle process, and it's perhaps the motive of who you are as a person, Marion, in that you're a curious explorer, and
Yeah.
very inherent to that is you have to be okay to let go what you know and meet what comes at you on the journey, right? I think that's very
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah, and it's also
Ethics
really
can
interesting
be
because sometimes
yeah,
you're in this
please.
bubble where you feel like really uncomfortable, and then you step out of it and you step into another world, like, oh, this is where everybody is. Like, okay, this is nice. So I feel much more comfortable, and I go, oh, that's also a possibility. I don't have to stay in something that doesn't align. And I'm specifically talking also about workplaces. So if you work somewhere, I mean, if you really enjoy your job, but it's actually not really aligned because the culture isn't culture fit sounds horrible, but you just feel like, yeah, this something's off about and you can just sense it from yourself. Then there's all of these other workplaces where you don't have that as much. And I've seen that also with I think the event where we met is like, see, this is a very diverse group of people of all walks of life. So I see that's possible. And like the other day I was at this AI conference, like, okay, this is a man conference. There's a few women here. Where did they all go? And then I go to women in AI. I'm like, oh, this is where they all are. And then you give that sort of, you get this expansion where you feel better. And then you can also go back into the world where they are not, because yeah, I might be the only one here. I might stand out here. I might just use it to my advantage now. But there's a whole bunch of us somewhere else that I can lean on. So I'm not alone anymore. Although in this situation I might be, but there's this whole group of us. I think that's an important thing even if you're the only one in a certain situation, there's always a lot of you somewhere else. You just have to find where your tribe is.
So beautiful. I love that because advocate burnout is a very real thing. And that sense of solitude and aloneness is also a very real thing. I love
Yeah,
that you make it okay to say, well, we evolve and fit ourselves to where we need to be at, where it's advantageous for us professionally or it's
yeah,
intellectually stimulating, but also stay connected to what nourishes us. And it's
yeah,
okay to traverse those worlds and be more than
yeah.
one thing. I think your approach to this, for me, I experience this as the opposite of being brittle with your
Mm,
values. Because the more brittle and hardened we are, that only this is right, we begin to see things in a sort of a polarized way, that this it's
yeah,
binary. And what you're advocating is instead to be more fluid in how we
yeah,
show up, how we experience things, and it's okay to weave in and out, go to places
yeah,
that nourish us, also show up in places where we can make a difference, even if we are just like the token sole person, right?
yeah, yeah. Binary is very boring. Yeah. You need the
That
whole colorful fluidity is much more colorful. That's a rainbow. Yeah.
Marion, for those who are perhaps early career or mid career professionals in exploratory new fields, let's say
Mm-hmm.
AI and innovation, for example, is one, because I know you're interested in many different things.
Mm-hmm.
For those early career or mid career professionals, do you have any observations around ethical dilemmas most relevant today? And what would your advice be to them in tackling such things? New things might come up that they don't know anything about,
Yeah.
don't know how to handle. Any advice for them?
Mm. Wow, that's a big question. Um, by the way, I just have to take a sip because otherwise I keep coughing. Mm. When it comes to there's a couple of thoughts I have, but I think one thing is if your gut says it's wrong, it probably is. And then it's interesting to see if you can find people who can help you, or you can ask ChatGPT nowadays, but you can also find other people to sort of have that conversation to figure out why you have this sense. Um, when you look at ethical dilemmas in the current state, um, from from a generative AI point of view, let's focus on that particular one. The one that bubbled up yet today for me is digital colonialism. And this is a new one. Maybe at least this is new for me. That just sort of pops up. But we know colonialism, right? One particular culture takes over, and that's we still have the remnants of that in our daily lives. Um, if you look at large language models, it's trained on the internet, but it's very American. So it's a very American dominant culture through the technology that we use. All our social, well, it's American or Chinese. So basically, that's two dominant cultures that produce all that technology, and then hence also you sort of roll that out over the world. All the movies you probably have Netflix or something like that. The majority of that content, or a lot of the content on there, is American culture, and we just start absorbing that. ChatGPT or those language models are based on American culture and values. So that is gradually rolled out over the world. You see that in their vision on trans people, especially with the current administration, that is rolled out over the world. So it is really important, and we have this conversation in Europe now about having more European focused tech. It's not just a technology thing, it's about preserving the diversity in cultures and preserving your values. So for example, in the Netherlands, there's DPTNL. So they're building a Dutch-based language model. And although that's not going to be as big as ChatGPT is, and might not be as performing, although you don't always need super large for something, it's important because talking about those images again, right? Then I remember that I prompted an image because I was doing this talk in a medical environment. So I thought, let's just like make a doctor with AI. And I was pretty proud of that image, and it was like the opening slide of my PowerPoint. And then the people from the audience, it was a small group audience, said, yeah, that's an American doctor's coat. We don't wear those. And I'm like, oh shoot. And that's just something really simple, but it's that. And then we're talking, so for the Netherlands, it's important that we have TPT-NL. And I just saw something from Virginia Dignam that in Sweden, yes, I think in Sweden, her university, she's an AI ethics professor, is now talking with the Samis. So the people from the northern hemisphere, how their culture is affected by the technology. So if we're not careful, this big tech, it's not just the big tech oligarchy thing, it's also coming with this value, and it's basically wiping out culture because it's so dominant and we're all using the same base. So I think that, so digital colonialism or e-colonialism or whatever word we're going to find for it, I think that's something we need to be more and more mindful of if AI is a reflection of society, a reflection of what specific society are we talking about, and can we how do we make sure that this beauty of all of our different cultures remains, because there's value in it. There's a lot of things that we have all the same, and we all have to go. If you go to a conscious level, there's a lot of the things, no matter what culture you're from, that are all the same. But there's these different nuances in how we speak and which language we use and how these languages translate into concepts that we need to make sure isn't a one size fits all. End of rant.
Yeah, no, it's such a powerful thing you're talking about. First of all, the idea that big tech does is not always victimless crimes, that there's actual impact on real human beings.
Oh
And the
yeah.
fact that digital colonization is a very real thing. Perhaps you could shed some light on this as a layperson and a person interested in law and policy. I was fascinated by this recent example at UEA where a student sued the university because they used facial recognition technology for exam taking. And this student happened to be a dark skinned person. The
Yeah.
software did not recognize them, and
Oh
they
yeah.
lost
Yeah.
the ability to take the test. And they said this is exclusionary. And the university's argument was they are not the perpetrators of the crime here. They simply paid for software that was used worldwide by many other organizations, many other domains. And so the
Yeah.
legal question for me was, so who is the offender here? There is a clear victim, but the
Yeah.
university will think we are not the people who perpetrated the crime here. I'd love for you to throw any light.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that bubble up now. So there's this documentary on, I think it's still on Netflix, called Coded Bias, that talks
That's right.
about this a lot.
Yeah.
So that's if for people who don't have all of this reference, go watch that. When you're looking at AI, the AI Act, they're also talking about liability and product liability. So I think it's helpful to start thinking of this software like if it was a car, right? So if you buy a car, you do expect certain things, the basic that is in there. So if there is no brakes in the car and you get an accident, yeah, it's the producer of the car that's very liable. But if you're driving in that car and you hit something, that's not the car's responsibility. That was you driving it, and then you're liable for that particular damage. So I think that's kind of how I would see this particular thing as well. And the AI Act is actually describing that also. There is this producer, user, and a third one. Oh yeah, creator. You can create the tag, then you have liabilities. But then if you start using the tag, then
Operator, maybe.
to
Yeah.
do something, you're liable for the tag. And if you just use it, you also have that. You have the three different levels of liability. So I think they're wrong to saying like, yeah, hey, we just bought a product that is, it's like, oh, he's like, yeah, we just bought a gun, and we just accidentally shot it. Yeah, we can't help that it fires. Well, it doesn't go entirely, but I think you have to look at these kind of analogies. If we just replace the software with a different type of product, would we still say the same? I think in this particular case, they should have said, we are really sorry that this happened to you. this was not our intent. We never bought the software with that particular idea, but we take our responsibility. How can we fix this? So let's make sure you can still do your exam now, and we apologize for your inconvenience. And we're going to at least be mindful now with more dark-skinned students that if this happens to them, we have an answer to that is actually more satisfactory. Like yeah, we don't recognize you. Sorry. You always have to have a plan B. So this is when you start using technology, you always have to have an alternative plan for what if the technology isn't working. And nowadays, also for all of us, is we're so dependent on electricity. If the electricity falls out, do you have a plan B? Do you have an emergency packet? Do you have candles in your house? It's exactly that particular thing. It's probably not going to happen, but you just have that stashed away in a corner somewhere. And I think that's how we need to see at these things with this technology. You always have to have a plan B for in case of something unexpected happens.
Oh man, Marion, I love, as always, the comprehensive and layered answer, right? The analogies of the gun in the car, the fact that what's an appropriate way for an organization to respond when these things do happen and they inevitably will. And finally,
Yeah,
the caution to everybody that always have a plan B. We cannot be overly reliant on some automated mechanism that makes our life
yeah,
easier. Anticipate that it might fail, and when it does, what you're going to do about it so that business continuity is
yeah,
not impacted. Beautiful.
yeah,
What
yeah.
is something that is inspiring you these days? Is there a quote or a book or
Oh
perhaps
gosh.
advice that you came across that's made you say, wow, I love this?
Let me just turn around my bookshelf if there's anything popping out. Um, I think in all of the technology things that are going on, it's good to start reading things that are much more about consciousness. So, really good book I like is Braiding Sweetgrass, and that is about someone who marriages science with indigenous wisdom. And it's things like that I think we need to look for. So, all of this
Can you
knowledge is
repeat
out
that
there.
title?
Oh yeah, Braiding Sweetgrass.
Ooh, bye.
By what's her name? Robin Wall Kimmerer.
We will flash that.
I
That's
will just
amazing.
put it slightly more into the camera.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
And this is just one of the books. And so this is for if you really, if you're just catching on this whole topic. But something I'm going to be reading soon is this one. This is about quantum and consciousness.
Ooh,
But that's
beautiful.
like if you're a bit further advanced in this whole concept of consciousness and technology and science. This is someone who, the author was one of the people who was part of the people who made the microchip. I think he had a near-death experience at one point. He knew stuff about quantum and also realized, consciousness might not be in the mind or in the head, in the brain, and has started exploring it. So I saw a podcast with him and I bought the book. So that's definitely one. And just if you want to do very practical, and I like this one, practical ChatGPT
Gosh.
style stuff,
Ugh.
but you also want to get into consciousness and you like Deepak Chopra. It's called Digital Dharma. That's and he's actively pitching it everywhere. There's actually, I think it's called deepakchopra.ai. He's got his own AI, and you can ask Deepak everything. This seems to be where AI, at least generative AI, seems to be going at the moment, where the top 3 or so use cases are no longer just writing text. It is having like a personal coach and asking spiritual questions to the technology. And if you prompt it well, you say to some, if you use ChatGPT, or maybe you should say Mistral, because that's the European version of it. If you use Mistral and you basically say you are a spiritual guru, you know everything about spirituality, consciousness, numerology, or and anything else that you want to have in there, I'm going to ask you guiding questions. And it's amazing because all that stuff from Rumi and so on it's all on the internet. So so it can pull from that as well, but you have to tell it to your large language model, and that is the language and the knowledge you want. Really interesting for spiritual journeys.
Wow. Wow. Amazing recommendations. Thank you so much. Marion, what are your passion topics right now for the audience who want to continue to engage with you and maybe even invite you to their respective organizations? Where can they
Right.
find you? And what are the passion topics you're currently excited to talk about?
Sure. Well, um, that it depends on where you are on the spectrum of things. So just to look at my website is marionmulder.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. So if you want to get a bit of a feel of what I do, just start following, connecting with me there. So you get a glimpse of what I do. From coming to speak to organizations, it's slightly about what we talked about today, but very practically, I give presentations on responsible, inclusive AI. That's something you can just invite me about. So that's if I'm coming to give you something, that's kind of that space is how can we want something with AI, we want a strategy for AI, we want to figure out how this is going to help our company. We want to do this in a humane way. So it's not about replacing people, but it's about how are we using technology to advance ourselves as an organization and our people, and making sure we get the balance right. That kind of stuff is when you want someone to bring something. If it's about giving me stuff, then I'm really interested in consciousness, in combination of quantum and consciousness. And the topic I'm exploring for myself, I'm still figuring out what it means, is called augmented consciousness. And that's for me is I think where technology and so natural intelligence and artificial intelligence are somehow going to work together to make things augmented and better. But that is where I'm seeing glimpses, and I'm like, okay, I'm interested in that. And that's where that book came from, the one about quantum and consciousness. That's what I'm really intrigued about myself. But it's not something I can be a speaker on too much yet. I'm a learner and explorer on that particular one. But once I've got the map, I'll start handing that over again.
Oh my goodness, what an amazing person you are. I'm so glad to have
Oh,
had
thank
this chat
you.
with you. Thank you for taking on this journey and taking us along on this journey with you and for sharing some of the exciting things you're excited about. We can't wait
Yeah,
to see what you're up to next. Thank you so
yeah.
much, Marion.
And thank you for inviting me, and for all the great work you're doing in ethics as well, and for the podcast series that you're making. It's important. So keep you doing the good work too.
Thank you, Marion.
As we wrap up today's discussion on the human conversation on leadership and ethics, it's clear that integrity and ethics are the cornerstone of leadership. Host Kaumadi Gowda thanks you for joining us in this vital dialogue. Before you go, hit that subscribe button and become a part of the community dedicated to ethical leadership. Share your thoughts and continue the conversation with #TheHumanConversationPodcast.